Harry Littman, what started with Abrago Garcia, the man from Maryland, the migrant who was disappeared to El Salvador into the concentration camp, we're now hearing other stories of Abrago Garcia's. I mean, we knew about it. I mean, I think the reporting from 60 Minutes, there's a whole other story there since it's been compromised and the executive producer left. But when it was doing independent journalism, we'll see what happens. But when it was doing it, I think they reported about 75 to 80% of the people that were sent to El Salvador have no criminal history in their home country or in the United States. And then we've been sharing all of these stories, like the gay hairdresser who fled Venezuela because he's gay and he was afraid he was going to be persecuted there. Was living a life here. He had a mom and dad tattoo. He was someone who was sent to the concentration camp in El Salvador. He's now a class representative in an ACLU lawsuit that's been filed. They've been doing great work, the ACLU, and I had their executive director on as well.
The great Anthony Romero. What a great interview. Everybody check that out. I'm sorry.
It's so incredible to have him on. Then there's the people with the tattoos for Real Madrid, the football club, and all these people whose families are saying, look, they may have had a tattoo, but not a gang member. And look, do we know one way or another? I don't know. I can't vouch for people, but I can vouch for due process, that they should be able to be confronted with evidence against them. And then we can determine in a court system that's public and we can figure this out. So we know we're not having Donald Trump and Kash Patel or Pam Bondi or a border czar be like MS-13, we're in a system of evidence. So we learned about another individual from Venezuela, a Trump-appointed judge in Maryland, talking about facilitating the return of this individual using similar language, to the Supreme Court. The Trump regime seems to be resisting that. I'll get your take on what you think is going on there. Yeah. But I think, Harry, we're seeing now a consequence of the Supreme Court's order about individual state habeas petitions. It's like one of these things where the Supreme Court kind of makes their own life more difficult than the federal courts by saying you can't bring them all in D.C. before Boasberg, file them all in different locations. So I don't know. I think the lawyers have been equipped to file these things everywhere. So we're hearing more stories and more orders. Facilitate return, new arguments opposing why this should not be happening. The DOJ's resources are also like they've got like the Willie Loman's, DOJ lawyer walking around in his briefcase, like just getting excoriated court after court. What a death of a salesman, death of a terrible DOJ lawyer in the Trump regime. What's going on here, Harry, though? And it seems that these legal groups that are out here, though, representing migrants who had not get due process, I mean, they are coming in strong, and the Trump DOJ is basically now just grasping for war. We're at war. We can't do anything because of the Venezuelan war. What do you make of it all, Harry?
First, your point, Ben, is exactly right. They've now, of these new 6 or 7, 4 seem to be, tough customers with bad records, and they're touting it. That's who the administration wants to be talking about. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're Osama bin Laden. The ruling is you get due process. And likewise, you're right. For the very first class brought by the ACLU were 5 people, all of whom denied they're members of Tren Aragua. Maybe they're lying, but it's not to Donald Trump, much less Kash Patel, to determine. And that is the number one point. Okay, but now the administration, they are really behind the 8 ball. They're just getting their head handed to them day in, day out with Abrago Garcia. And there's a pretty big development that by its nature didn't get a lot of attention, because what it was, I have a Substack on today about, the dog that didn't bark. It was, you thought the next move from Judge Zinnes would be to totally clobber them with contempt. Instead, this has been taken off calendar for a week with the acquiescence of the plaintiffs, of the deportees. So maybe they're trying to work out some deal to walk it back with Abrago Garcia. Of course, that's the one guy who the record shows, even though Pam Bondi fired a lawyer who dared to say it, that they made a mistake. These other guys, you have the DOJ offering what seem to be terrible and brazen arguments for denying due process. And as you say, are there 2 others down there, 22 others down there, 122 others. We don't know. And it's just not for Donald Trump, much less President Bukele to say. But you have 4 new people, and they were absolutely spirited away against an injunction. What's their argument, the DOJ? Well, the injunction ran against Department of Homeland Security, and it was Department of Defense playing. Man, that could be really dicey. If the DOD knows anything, you can't get away with, basically trying to shield them from responsibility. Then another guy who we know really is just like Abrago Garcia, a 20-year-old who had a right under a settlement agreement with the Biden administration. So he had every right that everyone else has, and then an additional right under a settlement agreement, which said, if you were a minor when you came here, you can play out your asylum claim before we will deport you. So he's got belt and suspenders, and the DOJ's ridiculous argument is the very fact that Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act means all the rights went away, including the settlement agreement. And now there's word of a third that has just cropped up. So I take it back. There's so many ways to think about this, and this really has become the sort of highlight, white hot center point of administration lawlessness that really has attracted the focus of the American people. Apparently, calls coming into members of Congress and town hall meetings and the like. But the administration is in a tight spot, and they've got no one to blame but themselves, because if they do give ground on Abrago Garcia, it's hard to know what else that week hiatus is for. For sure, just as you say, there are many others who might be in that position. They might not be, but who gets to decide under Supreme Court principle that even Alito and Thomas have reaffirmed the judiciary, not the executive branch. So this is going to be a mess that's going to play out, unless by chance, as he's now talking about, the president of El Salvador just empties the jails and doesn't exchange of prisoners. By the way, if he can do that, how hard could it be to bring them back? The mess is going to continue, and we know that there are at least 2 more people who are should as clearly not be there as Abrago Garcia as we sit here talking.
You talk about the prisoner exchange and this concept, which in theory would be viewed as a face-saving exercise for Donald, but it weakens us geopolitically, where Bukele is saying to the leader of Venezuela, Maduro, you need to release certain prisoners that are helpful to Bukele, and we'll give you the Venezuelans that Bukele has said that. And we'll give you the prisoners that the Venezuelans who the United States has given us. So the fact that Bukele is saying Maduro, he could facilitate the return to Venezuela in an exchange, goes and tells you everything there. But it also,
and we're giving them the poker chips to exchange, right? This whole basic thing is there's going to be much more legal challenges to come.
And I think about the Venezuelan community in Southern Florida who put hopes in Donald. Not suggesting all of them did, but a large group in that Southern Florida area were Venezuelans for Trump, and you're going to stand up to Maduro when the exact opposite is the case. And you see here Bukele to Maduro, and what's happening with these authoritarians all trading with each other. And we're talking about human lives here. It just first off, two points actually. New York Times Siena poll showed that on the Abrago Garcia issue, Donald Trump is underwater by about 30 points. By about 30 percentage points, people disapprove of the Abrago case. And by the way, Trump's underwater on immigration. Most people disapprove of the way he's handling it. And that's supposed to be his issue, because when you actually talk, people want strong borders. I want strong borders. People want there to be comprehensive immigration reform. I want there to be. People don't want criminals in the United States. But when you start saying, can you disappear human beings to concentration camps with no due process? People don't support that. And that's the difference between former President Biden's comprehensive bipartisan immigration. Do it with dignity, do it efficiently, get it done. And whatever the hell this is, where actually less people in the aggregate have been deported under Trump than under Biden on a month-to-month basis. Trump's just doing it very publicly and cruelly. I want to make that point. The other point I want to make is just imagine if Judge Boasberg's ruling in Washington, D.C., when he said, just stop that plane. Let's deal with this intelligently. If that was actually followed, we would not be in this mess with all of these people. I know not all of them were necessarily on that flight, but in general, we could. That's why you have injunctions. Some people are like, why do you do an injunction? That you have an injunction, and injunctions are followed because there could be what's called irreparable harm. So if people want to understand what irreparable harm means in practicality, it means that you now have 200, 300 people, many of which may not have criminal records in concentration camps, who can't be returned. It's irreparable. So the idea of the injunctive relief was to stop that from happening, pause the status quo, and then let's deal with it and decide what should happen. That's why it was so flagrant to me when that was violated, and when Trump violates injunctions like that, that it led to all these things that were easily avoided. And I think it would have been in Trump's interest to follow the order, go through the process, and he could have done a Trumpy thing. I wanted to do it. We would have been so strong, but the judge said I couldn't do it. But look, I really wanted to do it. And it actually probably would have helped him. I'm not trying to help him. It's just there's no strategic thinking. It's dummies leading dummies leading dummies. And you know, we've talked about that in other videos, because it would have benefited him if he followed the injunction and blamed the judge, and then the human lives would have been saved, and we would not have been in this situation. I'll give you the final word.
Just a couple quick points. First, Ben, I really think everything you say is really trenchant and a great combination of sort of strategy, common sense, politics, and law. Let me make one additional point about the law. You were trying to figure out where's the irreparable injury. At the time, all these people who are now rotting away in El Salvador were detained. They were already locked up in American facilities, so no possibility. You hear all this demagoguing of as if they're running rampant in American cities and, you know, murdering and rampaging. That's just false. It was the easiest thing in the world to just, they already were frozen, and figure out how to deal with them as a matter of justice. And then second, I just want to echo what you say. Of course, common sense people, they are trying so hard, is the administration, to say, oh, we're for getting rid of nasty murderers. They crazy Democrats are for keeping them there. It is so insultingly false. Of course, we're for strong borders. Of course, we're for, you know, deporting terrible criminals, etc. It is imbecilic of them to suggest that if you can't be for that and also be for a little document called the Constitution, which makes them have to do it right and have neutral decision makers rather than the crazies who are there make the final decision. So, you know, it's the ultimate in demagoguery to say that if you're against criminals, you must be also, if you're for the Constitution, you must be against public safety. It's a really damn lie.
Harry Littman, he's got the Talking Feds YouTube channel, the Talking Feds podcast, and the Talking Feds Substack. Everybody, go ahead and subscribe to all of them. I think you will, I think you will love them. And that's where I get my news from. I love them. I love you, Harry.
Thanks, Ben. Back at
Hit subscribe. Let's get to 5 million subscribers.
Can't get enough Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MeidasPlus.com.